goodness. All right, I'm not sure. Are we starting, guys, or are we waiting? I'll open my chat.
I think we're live.
I don't know, I can't work it out. If we've let people in. We're live. Okay. Hello, everyone. We are live. Mary, you're onto it. Okay, welcome to AMA number 40, 22nd of July. Hello, everyone who's here. We had fantastic feedback from the previous HoloFuel AMA, and which was only 2 weeks ago. It feels like a lot has happened since then. So a lot has happened since then, which is very exciting. But before we get into that, firstly, thank you everyone for your feedback on last AMA. It was fantastic, and we've got a lot of questions that have come directly from during the last AMA or has come after the last AMA. We also have about responses and further thinking, and we also have a series of questions that we were preparing for this AMA from a few weeks ago. So we'll see how many we get through. But before, just a couple of thank yous and announcements. So firstly, thank you everyone in various communities, various channels for all of your both ongoing support and then especially your questions about HoloFuel and your desire to uncover, challenge, get to specifics, get to clarity. Big thanks to a couple of people. So World of Holochain and Soul on Telegram have just been digging in so deep, Telegram and the forum. So really, really appreciate their drive. And hopefully, guys, we get your questions answered today. Let's see how we go. We have a DevCamp application. So DevCamp 7, completely community organized, community run. We have a new community organizer team that's running this DevCamp is doing absolutely fantastic work. Applications are live. The link will be in the chat. And we're sharing updates, general project updates every 2-3 days on Telegram, Twitter, and the forum. We haven't had one for a few days, so hopefully get some special news from Mary today. And remember the events, so holo.host/events for upcoming meetups, the DevCamp, hackalongs, other community activities. And if you want to get more involved and everything I've mentioned so far doesn't work for you, either visit the forum, so forum.holochain.org, jump onto Twitter or Telegram and start asking questions. And if you're a developer, it is now beginning a really good time to start learning about Holochain, join a virtual hackalong, join the dev camp, and start building your app. There is lots of momentum growing. Okay, so that's it for the events and the announcements. Mary, can you give us a little bit of an update on how the testing is going?
Yeah, so testing is going great. It's been a wild ride. It's been a couple, I don't know how long it's been. Time is just having, it's working a little bit differently for me right now, and things get compressed. So maybe it's only been a few days since we last communicated, but I feel like it's been weeks and weeks since I said anything because, some days just are so long. Starting off, people around the world are all testing. So I guess I want to start with a thank you to everybody who's testing, because the community of testers, I think there's 40 community testers right now that are participating in the pre-release test. And they're across all sorts of time zones, working with all sorts of different of us on the team, and also working with each other. And their feedback is so valuable. It's amazing. And you always say, oh, it's so great to get feedback. But seriously, this feedback is having an immediate effect. So we're taking, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit in my update just to kind of talk about how this is working. We literally are working on changes based on conversations we had 24 hours ago with community testers. And those changes, one of them is actually already in a test release that we're testing to see if we can do a fix right into the environment that people are testing in. Others are preparing for another release that's coming right after that, just to do some enhancements, because so much of what we're learning is, oh, when we use these words, people click on this button, or when we say this, that, oh, look, they don't know where to go for the next action to be taken. Oh, there's just so many things. We are so deep as people who are on the team developing these hApps. We are so deep into what we think we know and what we think we know and is not always right for how users behave. And so this has been getting this out to a group, a large enough group, representative enough group of people to really get that user experience feedback. It's been phenomenal, and we're taking it and we're making changes immediately so that when we go to the full release of this HoloFuel, this test fuel release to hosts, it will be that much more sensible to everybody. So let me just talk a little bit about what's been happening. So I think in other channels, we've talked about having 50 plus testers out there. We do. We have 40 that are in the community, and I think another 11 or so team members, maybe 12 or so team members that are in the network that is the HoloFuel network, that is the pre-release. And that means that many people have transacted. It means that many people have started doing multiple simultaneous transactions with each other in what we're calling a buddy test. And for the most part, the transactions are going great. When we hit 20, which was a big important one for us. It's the first time I think we've hit 20 in a live, like a field test. That's when sharding turned on for the DHT. So part of the reason we had been talking in some of our earlier communications about the measuring how long it's taking for people to sync with the DHT and send a transaction was so that we could measure this thing. We've got some automation and some testing, but I think I've mentioned a few times that our automated testing is really complex because there's so many different contexts for it. So nothing replaces like field testing, and especially for distributed apps. So that this is going as well as it is right now is super for all of us. We've hit a couple of snags. The hot fix I was just talking about was one that, you know, was unexpected. We hadn't seen it in any of our previous testing. It ended up being a small UI bug, which was not a big deal, but it actually had some follow-on repercussions that made it seem like transactions weren't working and made it seem like other things were breaking. And so when we were able to fix it, and able to identify the cause of it, that made a big difference. And that was super quick. We literally, I experienced it on my ports, and then other users started experiencing it on their ports. And then we immediately got our dev team involved and had them, you know, get in with the users and see what was going on, and we're able to replicate it. And now we're moving forward with that. So it really is, it is a great scenario of testing. So let me see if I've missed anything, because I had a few notes here. Yeah, we just that 17 of our testers have completed the buddy test. The buddy test was really important because it starts giving us more data in the DHT. So what that means is validations are happening more widely. There's more gossip happening across the network, and we're testing a bunch of simultaneous transactions, or at least close to simultaneous transactions. So that's really great. And so I guess beyond that, what's next is that we're going to get that hot release out, or that hot fix out, hopefully today, maybe tomorrow. All the feedback is working that people are giving to us is going to go out onto an enhancements release that we're going to take to our pre-release testers one more time, just sort of as a final validation. And then we're going to get this out to all the hosts. It's at the level that it's ready. So we really are getting this out to the open host community. We actually have a couple of other releases beyond that. We'll be talking about those in an update that we put out later today. So take a look at the lead org update that's coming out probably late this evening or this afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in. Yeah. And did I miss anything? Are you having questions about it?
Okay, so just to be really clear, so we're getting close to the point where we can go beyond the 50 community and core team testers and move out into the broader HoloPort hosting community. We've just got a hotfix and an enhancement before that happens.
Exactly. And the
Wow.
enhancements are really just, oh, let's remove this button over here because it's confusing. Let's change the way that people click on this, or on send or receive, because it's not clear at what point to do that. It's really just small tweaks that we're making. Oh, we didn't have the right decimal point validation that we need to put in there. Those are some of the examples of the small fixes that we're putting in right now and the enhancements. It's just things that will make it easier for a lot more people to be doing it, to be transacting. And remember, this is our initial release of HoloFuel, which is really test fuel. We're not transacting with real HoloFuel yet. And what it's allowing people to do is anybody who is a host who's got their own HoloPort, those are the folks that are testing in our open release that's coming up, and our open alpha that's coming up. So it's HoloFuel on ports transacted between hosts. So that's the first step. We have release after release planned for the ones coming after this. This is a big step, because this gets us on the road to the next major milestone that is really coming quite soon after this, which is our hosted hApps release. And that means that for the first time, people will be accessing all of these distributed hApps from a web browser, which is phenomenal.
Okay, but one quick final question on this before I jump in. But can you just give everyone a sense of like what it means to this, right? Because this release has been a huge deal. So what does it mean for you and the team to be in this position?
Well, I think if people, well, if you know me, you'd probably know that I'm an extremely impatient person. And all I've been telling people is it's coming for months. And basically my mornings have been, it's not ready, it's not there. And so these last few weeks, just to have each day getting up, and I think for everybody on the release team, on the dev release team, on the testing team, the transformation of that we're really doing this work now, that we're really getting it out to users, that we're really seeing it working in the field, that it's working on our ports day after day after day. It's such a shift. It changes like the whole environment, the whole culture, the whole feeling inside the team has transformed. We've felt good about a lot of different things over the course of the last few years as we've been developing this, because we know we've seen the challenges, and we've seen internally, we've seen the overcoming some of those challenges and knowing that those things made a difference. But it all just lands for us that much more strongly when we see community users on the apps. And so I know that everything that we said before, when we were seeing it, it wasn't transparent. People didn't have their own visceral experience of something. And so now we have that many more people having that experience. And very, very, very soon, the rest of the hosts who have their HoloPorts out there waiting will start transacting and having that real experience with the apps. So it's huge. Because not only the development on this particular parts, because you have to know, we've got a huge roadmap. We're working on a lot of different things simultaneously. We've got the Holochain team working on other basically enhancements or refactors to some of the underlying technology, because what we've found things in our testing, right? But even that team, I think they get just re-energized when the release is going, and it's everything just starts pulling us forward in a different way. I mean, we all know it. There's just an energy that does make a difference. And so we're all feeling it right now.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Well, let's now shift gears into the future again. All right. So first few questions are follow-up questions from responses in the previous AMA. And it's, I think, people really getting their head around the way HoloFuel will be transacted, how the ecosystem will be built out, things like exchanges and how they will work. So I'll go into question one. So that was from last week with Green Paper. Says that one party initiates the transaction, the HoloFuel transaction, leaving blank the fields the counterparty must complete. If this has to be a manual process, wouldn't it entirely defeat the purpose of having fast transactions? Can that process be automated?
Yeah.
And if it can't, how will exchanges interact if they manually need to countersign transactions?
Right. So yes, things can be automated in various ways, but let's see. So I think it's really true for the how the basic transactions between peers, right? But there can be pre-approvals in the hosting app, for example, where we've got invoices that are being sent from a host to a publisher, and the publisher has to pay them. There's going to be settings that the publisher can configure to say, yes, pay it if it matches X criteria, set of criteria, if it's under a certain threshold, or if it doesn't have any flags that indicate that there might be something different about it. Those are validation rules that are being set in the app for folks. And the reality is that other apps, I mean, some HoloFuel, as you guys all know, is going to have an API that is accessible and can be used by other apps. And that's very important, because that means that while the base fundamentals of how HoloFuel transacts won't change, some of the things that trigger the transactions and start them or whatnot can be done. And some of that's written at the DNA level, and so that's specific to HoloFuel, but some of the other parts are not. I mean, so you can start a transaction through an API as well, or through another app, essentially. I mean, that's how we're saying it can be integrated in with, for HApp developers who want to use HoloFuel within their HApps. That's the point. So,
okay.
I don't know if I answered all of that.
Yeah, no. So just so I'm really clear with it. So I think what might be happening is people are thinking about HoloFuel like something like an ERC. I guess what you're saying is that HoloFuel is actually either configurable or programmable. So some of these things, when we're talking about the two-party countersigning, there's things that there's either approvals or configurations that you could be making.
So let's I think what you're trying to get into is the exchange scenarios versus, is that what you're trying to go into?
I think the scenarios that I hear a lot about are say if you're moving transferring large amounts of HoloFuel, like maybe exchange is one example, but between two parties. I think where I'm getting to is the non-hosting use cases and how HoloFuel might be used in a non-hosting environment where there's benefits of using HoloFuel, but you don't outside the way that it's optimized for and configured for the hosting environment. Exchanges are one, large transactions, integration into other apps.
So exchanges are a special case, right? And I think it's important to sort of understand. One is they might do a lot of different things with how they integrate with HoloFuel, and we can't predict all of those things. But I have to imagine that at a certain level, it's going to be a lot like when you deposit into an exchange. They have typically they have the keys to your account, right? It is possible that they could still maintain some of that and have that agreement be different. I don't know how they're going to manage for that exactly. And it really depends on whether or not it's a distributed exchange, a centralized exchange, what their intention is for all of that, for managing that for users. So I'm not going to try to predict all of that. Arthur might be better at predicting some about how people might architect their solutions than I am, ahead of the game, especially. So, but what I will say is related to transactions that, like non-hosting transactions, whether they're large transactions between parties. Yes, we've talked about this being explicitly a micro transaction currency, and there's going to be certain things that actually are under the hood for that. So a person might be able to say, oh, I'm going to send this large amount of HoloFuel that is actually going to, under the hood, be broken up into a lot of microtransactions. That leads directly into some of our fraud prevention, which is that if people are doing smaller transactions and something goes wrong, you can stop all the ones that come after it. So one bad transaction is the beginning of an invalid state. And so that's the reason why we want to push that down into the microtransaction realm. It's actually a protection for everybody. The thing is that your UI might not reflect, like, you don't have to go put in 100,000 microtransactions on a front end. You could put in the larger amount, sign for the larger amount, and that will automate the transactions that are done at a micro level below. So that's going to be built into how HoloFuel works. By the way, that's not in the current release. That's not what we're testing. That feature's not built yet, but it's part and parcel of how HoloFuel will work for beta. It's critical for how it will work for beta.
Yep. Okay. And is that something that a user or an application would, like, just so I can get my head around this a little bit, because we talked about one, that a transaction itself in a particular environment can be configurable, but here we're saying like a larger transaction might then batch up a series of tiny transactions, or might be split into a series of tiny transactions. Is that something that the users or different parties configure, or is that just inherent in the design?
So the breaking up into all the microtransactions, that will be just inherent in the design. That's a requirement for how it works in HoloFuel. Like I said, that gets at the heart of fraud prevention. The other configuration for something like how I described the way that, for instance, hosting is using it with invoices and payments of invoices, where the payments of invoices can be automated. That's something that's more on the configuration side.
All right, super. Thank you so much. I'm sure people listening will keep having questions on this one, so I'm looking forward to seeing what comes next. I'll make sure that I've got Telegram closed so I don't get pinged with that during this conversation
right now.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Okay, so let's go on to reserves for a second. So let's imagine a scenario that reserves selling HoloFuel to buyers. Does the reserve charge the buyers in HoloFuel terms or USD terms? And a little bit of context around this is it's quite easy in a way to calculate an internal price, so HoloFuel terms with the hosting demand factors. But how would the reserves determine the hosting price in USD terms, so not an internal price, in a way, an external price? This would mean the reserve would need to factor in external market factors like exchange rates, etc., not related to the hosting factors.
I think there might be some confusion in the question. So it sounds like the thinking in the question is that the reserve is making a determination, but it's really hosts that guide all of the pricing. I mean, hosts get to say what they charge for hosting, and that's done in HoloFuel. But then hosts also say what their minimum redemption rate's going to be at reserves. So in this way, it's not us, it's not Holo, it's not the reserve having to know this. It's all guided by the hosting marketplace, because hosts are going to be limited in what they can charge for hosting based on what publishers will actually pay. So this ties it sort of to that market, that hosting market demand. We're not really determining a price in USD terms. I mean, we are reflecting a price in USD terms that's guided by what the demand is from the hosting market. So at the end of the day, there's going to be some relationship to it, right? I mean, like, it's going to stay. I think one of the questions that always comes up is like the tension between the price at the exchange versus the price at the reserve. But the reality is that tension is built to always kind of pull them together, not to have them go too far apart.
Yep.
So it maintains within, but this is really what, when we've talked about it in the past about sort of being like a gravity, the gravity being the host dynamic, the hosting dynamics, this is what we meant.
All right, so I'm gonna make sure I'm clear on this one as well. So individual hosts are expressing their pricing in terms of HoloFuel. They're of course
for hosting.
For pricing for hosting, correct? Yeah, they're expressing the price for hosting. They're making their offers of hosting out into the marketplace effectively in HoloFuel terms.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're configuring their hosting app and saying,
they're setting their prices, yeah.
Setting their prices in HoloFuel terms. Now, they will, I think the question's pointing to, for like that to have a real world transaction, I'm imagining hosts will be looking at a relationship between HoloFuel and USD. They want to look at those prices, sure. But the point is, they're not in the hosting app when they're setting their prices. They're not setting them in US dollars. They're setting them in HoloFuel.
Yeah, this is going to be something that's going to iterate for a while in terms of really getting everybody fully educated on what it all is going to turn out and mean, right? Because nobody's going to walk into this situation and go, oh, I have the perfect concept of how this is and what I should charge. So we will have some pricing calculators that help the hosts to figure this out, that kind of pull some data around, set some possibility things, but we can't guide it, and we aren't guiding it. We aren't setting it. The pricing calculators will have a sort of a baseline thing just to get started. But then after that, they're really going to be pulling from the data within the system to sort of give more comparative suggestions in HoloFuel, because yeah, it is difficult to kind of think. It's hard to like put the HoloFuel hat on and suddenly think in HoloFuel, right? That's not normal to us yet. And I get that it's a little bit more difficult, but if you think about it like Airbnb or something like that, when they first started, they didn't set prices, they didn't set prices. The people who have their homes who were renting them, they were setting the prices, and there was huge variability, right? Like some people were charging, a ton, and others. And the only sort of reference that they really had, and I don't know how much people looked or didn't look, was hotels.
Yep.
That was probably the biggest difference when they were renting rooms, or maybe they were looking at other, sites that they did, vacation rentals or stuff like that as comparisons. But that's kind of what I think people were looking at as external sources. Well, all those external sources exist if people want to look at and compare to other hosting companies, because we're still charging for the basics of what hosting is, which is storage, compute, and bandwidth. I mean, those are still basics of cloud hosting. So it'll take some time. It'll take some time for what we're presenting in the UIs to make the most sense to people, for us to get the feedback. And again, this is going to be those feedback loops with users to really make it work perfectly. I mean, it's not going to like sprout out, in its first incarnation, first release in some perfect state. Where this is going to be an area that we know we're going to keep enhancing for quite a while to make this, a great experience for everybody.
Great. I think so that's great on the host side. In terms of the reserves side,
mm-hmm.
Given the hosts are expressing pricing in terms of HoloFuel, it's going to make sense that the reserve expresses pricing in terms of HoloFuel as well, because it's reflective of the hosts out there and how they're pricing. I think is that how we're expecting?
Well, here's the first thing though. The first reserve for is hot.
Yep.
And for 6 months, or really until the end of the swap period, the price is 1-to-1. So what we're doing during this initial part of beta is getting and collecting all of the pattern data of use on the hosting platform, because that's critical for us refining some of the ways that these things will work, because we're basing off of then how are people charging, what are people doing, what is the demand, what is the minimum redemption rate for the hot reserve. Remember, the reserve is only hot at the beginning, so it's not going to USD, it's actually only going to hot. We will do other ones as well, but there's going to be already. Got that, everybody?
I know.
Okay, yeah, we're back.
Oh, back. Okay. Wow.
Still difficulties.
All right. So we were in such a flow. Okay. Do you have a recollection? Very strange. All right. Let's just confirm it's live on YouTube before we keep going. Okay. So looks like it's streaming. Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
Yep, it's good. It's live on YouTube. Okay. There you go. It was a channel clash. Okay, sorry about that, everyone. So I think we'll try and pick it up from. There's one piece I think we hadn't quite closed, which is, as we were talking about the host setting their pricing in terms of HoloFuel, and Mary, I think you were starting to explain that. Then what would that mean in terms of the reserve setting their pricing? Where you were talking about, well, that hot is the. So I think that's a nice place to just reach back into.
The reserve has an algorithm that each reserve is setting pricing distinctly, right? Because it's setting it in HoloFuel to whatever currency. And for each reserve, all of the hosts get to set their minimum redemption prices, and they can change those ongoingly. So they can change their minds about these things. And we expect they will, in the same way that people are changing their minds at any exchange about how much they'll take or won't take for another currency when they're doing a trade. So this is why that when they configure what their minimum is, that's a huge part of indicating what the pricing will have to be to come in, because we want to make sure that what's coming in is coming in at the prices that make the whole market work. So that's what I mean by it's not Holo precisely. We're actually being guided by the distributed marketplace. Did that make sense?
That makes sense to me. I think. Thank you. Let's see. I'm sure we're going to have more questions around this coming up. So we'll just keep going as they come in. So there was one other, actually a couple of others from last week. So one was, we talked about a source chain explorer and how Holo wouldn't create a source chain explorer. And someone's come back and said, well, wouldn't we be able to do it better and safer, and it'd be more trustworthy if we created it rather than rely on a third party?
Well, first of all, I don't think I said we absolutely wouldn't do it. I think I just said it wasn't currently on our roadmap and that we have a lot of other things to do. First, there's a good chance we will build something that will explore source. We'll be building queries that explore source chains, and we already do that. But Source Chain Explorer is an app, and we are building lots of other apps that may use the queries that are exploring source chains, but we don't have it on our sites right now. Right now, in this moment, that's the app we're going to release. And it's not to say that we wouldn't or won't. It's just that I see that it's as likely or more likely for someone else to beat us to it. And the idea about security or safety and trustability on that, no, it's an open source distributed holochain hApp. It should be, if somebody has a concern about it, go read the code. These things will get reviewed. There will be communities of app devs. They will have their own world of ratings and what people think about them. And so I don't think that's necessarily true. I certainly hope it's never true, because I hope that all the builders of hApp devs or hApps out there are building absolutely wonderful hApps.
Thank you. That's fantastic. I think that it's a constant reminder that there's going to be an ecosystem there is an ecosystem that's already forming around what we're doing.
Yeah.
And I think as we're spending time talking about HoloFuel and thinking about what the future will look like, it's just a big reminder that we are just, our passion is to continue to grow the ecosystem. So we're going to be way happier if we're the ones who could build the best source chain explorer, then we are failing. We want people to come in and build something way better. We need to focus on what we need to focus. Yeah, jump in.
No, it's really great, because sometimes we know certain things before some of the developer community is going to know it, right? It's understandable. But there's an example just today where I was on a call with a bunch of our hApp developer community, and there was a moment where I was actually asking one of them for something that they had built, because I wanted to see it again, because it did this beautiful visualization of how a transaction goes through a network. And that the way that they did it already, I thought would be really great to inform how we could help communicate something on Holo. Because it really is an interaction when you've got the ecosystem working, when you have all these people. That's the whole point about distributed and widely distributed work, right? You get better software, you get more variety, you get amazing things that you can't predict. I couldn't have predicted that this thing would have been built that would have modeled something out, but I happened to see a demo a few weeks back and I was like, oh, I need that again. So it's fantastic. And I think it's just going to thrive because it builds upon itself with all this variation.
Yeah. Completely agree. And I think we're everything's so focused, exactly what we wanted was we're really testing Holochain through Holo.
Right.
And so everything's so focused at the moment around the releases and the testing that you were talking about earlier, not even behind the scenes, but bubbling away in the community are apps that have, some of them are centralized at the moment, but have been built for 1, 2, 3 years that are also really, by the time we get to beta, will also be shaping how Holochain's used, pushing the boundaries, pushing the thinking. It's exactly what we want. It's just that hasn't been coming to the surface as much in how we're communicating, because the focus is so clear.
Yeah.
Okay, super. Okay, so one we've touched on, but I don't think we've touched on in a particular way. So let's see if we can close this off for people today. But people still this question around, okay, I have HOT right now, and if I'm swapping it 1-to-1 for HoloFuel, what do I do then? If I'm not necessarily using that HoloFuel for hosting, what do I do if I want to if I want to turn that HoloFuel into another currency back, either in HOT or turn it into US dollars, but I haven't earned the fuel through hosting?
Well, sure. First of all, HOT's not going anywhere. We don't have a plan we have a plan actually to use it as the onboard to HoloFuel and to keep using it after the 1-to-1 swap goes away. So it's not like your HOT is just going to disappear. And in fact, I think a lot of people may decide just to keep HOT instead of swapping into HoloFuel. We need some HOT swapped into HoloFuel to kickstart the process. And we know that a lot of people who have HOT right now are going to be, they're part of the ecosystem. They're part of the hosting ecosystem. So it will be going in. But there's lots of options, I think. And I think that whether you're in hot or HoloFuel, there will be opportunities for exchange. And so right now the liquidity is in hot because that's what the exchanges have. But we already have said that, we're in these conversations. We have exchanges that want to have HoloFuel, and they will. It's a matter of just when they have it. So will they have it the day one of beta? Not necessarily, but hopefully not everybody who's invested right now wants to get out of it day one of beta. So that would be a not a good scenario for any project, right? So yeah, this is a real long-term investment. It's going to be gaining value, I believe. So I shouldn't be saying this. This is shut myself up here, right? But I'm building, I'm part of building something big. I wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't like, if it didn't have real value in the world, right? And that's kind of what I'm getting at. When you're building real value in the world, it doesn't happen in an overnight way. It happens through the growth of the project and the adoption and the ecosystem growth and other people doing it. And because it's distributed, this is about a whole bunch of other people putting themselves into a business modality, because every host and every publisher are part of that. They're running their own businesses. I mean, it's a business to business sort of environment and ecosystem. So that just grows in value, that as it grows in use, as it continues. So I can't, this question was about the investor. So let me try to get back to the investor, sorry. Yeah, it will be on exchanges is what I'm going to say.
Okay, gotcha. Well, firstly, I think you were speaking to the investors maybe a little too much in expressing your passion and your belief in the value of what we're building. And I think, look, we do also see that in many ways with what's happening in the external environment, whether it's the valuation of different protocols and all sorts of things, and the potential of what we're doing is extraordinary. So yeah, firstly, I love that. And secondly, just so I think it's really clear for people who have this question, what I'm hearing you say is, one, you don't need to swap hot into HoloFuel, right? Firstly, it's we're not forcing people to swap hot into HoloFuel, and hot will have a utility as the basis for the first reserve account.
Right.
And secondly, I think what you're saying implicitly is that is a little bit referred to in our green paper. We're nurturing this phase through hot, and the next phase is going to be nurtured through the stimulation of the economy through HoloFuel, right? And so to just flood that with all the hot doesn't necessarily make sense for the HoloFuel economy. That fuel will be coming in really as the demand comes in for the fuel. So yes, there'll be a lot of people holding hot that will move into fuel really early on because they want hosting, right? Or they want what HoloFuel has to offer, but not everybody. And that's actually another, in a way, by design, because you don't need all of the hot turned into fuel from day one. It can come in as the demand exists, and the demand is going to be driven by, one, the growth and adoption of the hosting ecosystem, which we know from many signs right now that there is a big demand for distributed hosting. And the second is, as that demand grows, services alongside are going to grow.
I do want to step back because I think you're right. I was talking to the investor when I was talking about the business side of it. And I want to say a little bit more about it, because it's not just about the mechanics. It's also about where things are headed after beta. And I think that's critical. And you know this, David, because you are in conversations where people are starting to talk about, well, what else? In hosting the Holochain hApps and building out this huge opportunity for truly distributed applications with Holochain, that's our fundamental commitment, right? That's what we've been about. It's what we wrote about in the green paper. We think it's going to be transformative in and of itself. And it's not the only thing you can do with Holo. And I think what happens is that we talk about Holo and Holochain together so often that we actually don't sometimes tease out some of the opportunity for Holo that is separate from Holochain.
Completely.
And there's huge opportunity as a distributed hosting platform, as that doesn't have to be about just hosting Holochain hApps. And we're not building those products and services yet. That's not what we've promised our initial investors. It's not what we've promised our initial supporters and people who are building Holochain hApps with us right now. But it's out there, and it's something we're intending, and it's something we're talking to people about, and we're looking at what the opportunities are. And that is a huge part of what will also build an ecosystem, a business ecosystem for Holo.
Super. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. So we're at time, but I think we'll run with the trouble. So we'll run for another 10 minutes or so. So let's go into the HoloFuel tokenomics for a second. So again, great. So this actually, before I do this, so some of the questions we've just been looking at have come from long-term supporters and people who have been deep into HoloFuel, Holochain, really asking questions over months and some cases years. And then we've got a series of questions that I'm about to jump into now, which have come during the previous AMA, like as the AMA was happening into YouTube, but we were already beyond full of questions at that stage. I think we pushed in about 4 or 5 and got them answered quickly. But here there's another whole series of those. So we're going to jump into those now. So firstly, anyone who's on the YouTube, who's on listening, watching now or later, if you have a question, please put it in to the YouTube channel, because if we can't, we're not going to be able to get into any new questions today. But certainly we'll be picking them up at the next HoloFuel AMA or picking them up in other places in the meantime. So just wanted to pause and thank everybody for their contributions, and they are noted even if we don't get to it within the AMA. And Mary, just jumping in, so then the tokenomics of HoloFuel. So we've talked about renting cloud computing, but what about giving it its scarcity? How do we see an increase of demand for HoloFuel, or the increase? How does you know where the question's going?
I do. It's interesting because I don't think scarcity is really the right economic principle at play for cloud hosting services. I mean, there isn't. It's not to say scarcity can't affect prices, but it's not likely going to have a huge relationship to demand. Demand's going to come from the need that developers and software companies have for hosting services. And all you have to do is to go look at all the industry reports, the path of the industry itself, to see that cloud hosting services, the demand's been growing and growing and growing. It's projected to keep growing. It's actually the reason we chose Holo's model it's perfectly suitable for Holochain, but we were very intentional about a business model for the first big Holochain application, right? And so anyway, in the near term, adoption of Holochain is the key driver, because like what I was saying earlier was directly about that. We're building out a Holochain ecosystem. We're promising to make this huge transformation in what it is to be able to have distributed apps that function in ways that adoption is possible for everyday users of the internet. That's the intention. That's what's going to drive adoption initially. And then after that, a lot of different other hosting products will be built and take advantage of a distributed hosting power on the network, which is distinctive, right? And so there's going to be certain kinds of things that it might be better for. And I think we talked about some of those in the green paper, but you know, different types of distributed analytics or other, I'm sorry, this is not, they're not all top of mind right now, but there's a whole series of different industries that it's specifically useful for, but where the scarcity principle actually works. And I think it's interesting that it's used here. I think it's with marketing and investment, right? And it's all about who can get in. You know, usually there's some limit and who can get in early on something, whether it's in terms of sales or investment or that sort of thing. And but with real value companies, that they keep generating value, they keep growing, and they keep generating that value over time. It's not like a once and done sort of thing. So yes, the people who get in earliest, they might have some of the most extreme experiences in terms of that value rise. But you know, you buy into a good tech company today, the investors are still saying that's some of the best things to invest in. That may not be the attitudes of all of the crypto investors, but the same principles apply. You know, if you got in really early in ETH or something like that, you might have made a fortune. But do you think that means that people shouldn't invest in crypto today? No, because there's still value to be gained in all of these things. So
great. So let me just check something with this one.
yeah.
Because I think, to me, what I'm hearing from this question, and I hear it a lot in different ways, is one way you can embed value is through scarcity.
Yes.
And you especially embed value through scarcity when no new value is being created, as in no new productive value is being created. The way to drive a price is through scarcity, right? Because you can't do it any other way. But as far as I understand, and maybe this will help people with HoloFuel, one of the things that we might expect to see over time is that there's more productive value in a unit of HoloFuel over time. Is that correct?
Yeah. Right. So this, I think, and Arthur's talked about this on some of his, maybe on some of the AMAs in the past. And I think we've written it into some of the 101, the HoloFuel 101. And this gets at the price dynamics so that, you know, if the price does drop, well, that means you can buy more hosting power with one unit, right? And just like every other technology over time, you always expect to see certain kinds of compressions, but that's a different kind of pricing. That's not the exchange pricing, that's the purchase power issues that you're pointing to. And that will always be the case because we're in the same industry as these other, we're going to be dealing with the similar pressures as everybody in a cloud hosting industry, you know, in terms of how that is expected and how that goes. But that doesn't mean that at the level of the value of the overall, which is kind of where the price of the fuel is, that there isn't an ongoing increase as well, right? So it just means that the relationship between what that conversation we were just having a few minutes ago around how hosts set their prices for selling of their services and what they set their price for, their minimums for how they're going to get out of that at the exchange, those things will shift over time.
Great, super. So the way I like to, I guess, think about it is as the network grows and you're playing on the dynamic of general computing, that as the network's growing and the compression is existing, things are becoming more effective, the power of the network is growing, and the ability to create compute is in a way becoming less expensive, then what you're going to be getting in an external sense for one unit of HoloFuel, you'll be getting more compute from the external factors for a unit of HoloFuel than you were before. And that can be driving a price increase dynamic as people are willing to pay more for a unit of HoloFuel. So, you know, in a way, we're looking at a dynamic which is something we've seen play out in the area of compute over the last 20 or 30 years, and tapping more into that dynamic than into the digital representation of gold or other forms of scarcity that have existed over many, 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 many years.
Right. It's really hard to look at it and get an apples to apples comparison when you're really talking about it with a scarcity type of mentality, because it just doesn't work that way. One of the things that does happen is that the other mechanisms of supply that we talked about last week is that supply can actually contract too. It can grow and it can contract, and so that's that actually is supportive of the value stability in lots of ways, because you can go through cycles, and sometimes those cycles might be even related to internal pressures, like we may be paying down basically some of the initial infrastructure funds, right, on our credit line. That shrinks supply, and that's a good way to shrink supply and keep value at times. And it will be based on that actually gets done through the higher value of the overall network, because it means that the revenues are high. And so we're using those revenues to do that. And so this is an ongoing breathing economy. And so it's really tough to correlate it to how something like gold works, or really completely fabricated, I would say, to some degree, but not or supply based or limited supply based type of ecosystems.
Okay, super. Thank you. Let's rattle through a few. I'm going to go.
Yeah, some of
I'm
them
going to speak
easier.
fast. See if that will help. So, is there a country we're focusing on?
No. Some areas are just more open or committed. So I would say, look where Holochain meetups are happening. That's where adoption, that's where engagement really lives.
Great. Is there 177 billion supply?
More or less. That's not the exact number, but I talked a lot about supply at the last AMA. So, but like I just was talking about, HoloFuel supply is dynamic. It's going to grow. It can't really shrink to lower than the amount of hot.
Yep. Okay, perfect. Will the 1% fee on HoloFuel transactions be around forever?
Most likely, or something like it. As I talked about last week or 2 weeks ago, the fees are actually the revenue for Holo, which end up also supporting the Holochain Foundation and the app community.
Yeah, and I think, as you talked about last week, when you look at the fees for the 1% for providing the infrastructure to run the distributed hosting network and the apps or hApps that are possible on top of it, versus the margins and fees charged by the cloud industry, I think 1%'s whatever, probably 95%, 99% cheaper than that. So, okay. Did you sell HoloFuel not hot to USA during the ICO period? If yes, how many you sold?
We did a pre-sale of HoloFuel to folks in the US who were not part of the ICO. So this was after the ICO. And it was just to people who were involved in the Indiegogo campaign. So they were already customers of Holo in that sense. And we sold about just under $185,000 worth of HoloFuel at ICO prices. So something like, I think, I don't have the number in HoloFuel units, 1 billion or 1.5 billion HoloFuel. Small. I mean, it was really small in comparison to the ICO.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And just that was a private sale. Just so, yeah. Okay. So can a HoloFuel transaction be reversed in case, say, you sent money to a scammer?
No, just like crypto, if you use your keys and you say yes and send it and you authorize it, it's done. It does require acceptance. So if the acceptance hasn't occurred, then well, in this current version that we're testing of HoloFuel, there's no way to cancel a transaction that's already been offered. But I'd have to go check but I'm pretty sure there might be a way to do that. But what scammer is not going to accept it immediately? So no, the answer is no. If you accidentally send something to a scammer and they got their money from you, it's just like the real world. You've lost it.
Yeah, I don't want to diverge too much, but I think like inherent in this question, at least we've addressed before and we could address at a later time, but because there are many more identity patterns built into Holo and Holochain, that I think that even the orientation of this question, when people start experiencing the environment, they'll see it's a little bit different from the experience of, over time, it will be quite different, I think, from the experience of what you might have right now when you're putting in, with your crypto wallet.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, though, the way I listen to the question, and maybe this is just my orientation because I happen to have family that's been scammed, and it, with fiat currencies, with national currencies, is that I just always hear this in its most general and generic way, right? There will always be scammers in the world.
Yep.
And there will always, so much of it is psychological. Most of it's actually not about the technology that's used, because if you get somebody to agree to send you something, you get somebody to agree to send you something, and it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Great point. All right, I received my HoloPort in January. Thank you. Set up and connected. Tried to log in. No luck. How do I try again?
So it's just the reason you can't log in right now is because it's only open to the community testers, to the pre-release testers that we were just talking about in today's update, but very soon. And so first of all, if you do have a monitor and a keyboard that's connected to your HoloPort, then you can volunteer and you could become a pre-release tester. I don't know if they're accepting new ones right this moment, but it's a regular thing up on the Holo forum, so that you can definitely reach out and ask about that. But soon, for everybody else who's a host, who has a HoloPort, we're going to be opening that up, so that alpha test will be coming to you.
Awesome, thank you. HoloFuel will have a price as soon as it goes live.
Hot. Okay, so given that we've opened the question that just came before this, let's be careful here. We're not going live with this, with the current releases. We're still in our alpha test. We're just making it available to all the hosts to do testing. But live means our beta release. And when HoloFuel goes live at beta, the hot price will be the HoloFuel price, at least at the reserve, until at the very end of the announced swap period, the 6-month guaranteed swap period. And yeah, that's the answer.
I'm a host. How do I figure out what to charge?
That's a great question. It's still really a bit tricky. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but hosts can charge whatever they want. And so we're going to be helping, like I said, with some automated tooling. But just like with Airbnb, people pick prices all over the board. I'm sure hosts will pick prices that are going to be all over the board. And some of them will be, some folks will set them because they know how much it costs them. They're like running all these analytics about how much it costs to run their HoloPorts and how much they want to make and all of that. And others will just sort of be following the norms. But yeah, we're going to do a really bare bones of that tooling in the beta release, and then we're going to just keep evolving it for people and hopefully making it easier for you.
It'll be an amazing example of collective intelligence in a distributed world.
Exactly.
Yep. Okay. And when is open alpha test?
That's great. So open alpha test actually started when we sent HoloPorts out to everybody. And I say this because I really want everybody to understand there's just phase after phase after phase of open alpha. And we got so much critical information about how ports work when people started registering their HoloPorts back in January, February, March. That was super important for this whole process. And I know it didn't look like much or feel like much, or it seemed like a little bit of a pain, but I just want to again say thank you to everybody who did that, because it was incredibly important for our team to be able to continue to be building things. So the testing we're doing right now on pre-release with the HoloFuel transactions, that's going to be moved right into the open host community. That's open alpha as well. So each time we move something into the host community or a wider community, that is open alpha. That's just what it looks like. And it's going to have different variants, because there's different, if you think about it, Holo is a marketplace with different groups of people, right? It has hosts, it has publishers, it has app developers. And so each portion of open alpha is just opening it out to wider communities of those different types of roles. And so that's going to continue happening.
Awesome, thank you. I think we're getting time for wrap. We're going to miss the
Yeah.
KYC question, unfortunately. So we'll get to that next HoloFuel AMA.
Yeah. HoloFuel part 3, maybe.
I think it's going to. Sorry, Mary.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think we're going to have a HoloFuel part 3. So Mary, thank you so much for that.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
And just as a reminder for everyone, so thank you so much for watching. Keep the HoloFuel questions coming. Hopefully we'll also build our form of like collective and shared intelligence around HoloFuel and how it's going to work as it gets started with all of you. So please, that feedback loop is fantastic. Just thank you so much, as Mary said, to the community testers, and we're delighted and excited with the progress. And also we know there's a lot of releases to go, so we'll be heads down and working together with you all and all of the HoloPort hosts who are out there waiting to do their wave of testing as we work towards beta. So a lot of progress, a lot to come. For those of you, just a final reminder: events, holo.host/events for meetups. Lots of meetups going on, virtual meetups at the moment. The link in the chat to the community run Dev Camp 7 if you'd like to get your application in for that, and if you'd like to join hackalongs or but again, maybe there'll be a link in the chat, or just start going to forum.holochain.org and start to get involved in the community. And final thank you, just Mary, to you for this, and the team for the amazing work, the outstanding progress, and also just the updates and keeping us all engaged and informed and coming along the journey together. I think just the last couple of months has really started to bring to life some of both the challenges and successes of building out this new ecosystem and building in a distributed way. So it's deeply appreciated. I know there's so much going on in the development world. Jumping up for air and sharing what's happening in a way that people can understand isn't always the highest priority. So I really want to just express huge gratitude for that.
Yeah, it's I'm glad it's making a difference.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a wrap. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching, and we'll catch you at the next AMA.